What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Barbells and Trails podcast. I am your host, Brett, back with another episode. And this one's a little more relaxed, more on a particular interest of mine in music and a specific artist and kind of his life story and his music career. And also, he just had a movie come out about him, documentary movie, whatever you want to call it, on Hulu. And that person is Colson Baker, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Who is Colson Baker? Colson Baker, known as Machine Gun Kelly, is an American rapper, singer, musician, actor, and movie producer, which that one's a new one. Colson Baker was born April 22nd, 1990 in Houston, Texas, to missionary parents, which actually caused him to move around quite a bit from Egypt to Germany, parts of Africa, throughout the United States. At one point, he lived in Kuwait and several cities throughout the U.S., including Denver, Cleveland being what he considers his home, and a bunch of other places. When Colson was at the age of 9, his mother actually left him and his father, and that was when he settled in Denver. While living in Denver, Colson's father actually moved to Kuwait for a job for a year. And in that time, Colson basically decided to skip out on school. So he missed like 35 so days of school, and his dad ended up finding out and pulled him out of school and moved him to Kuwait. And when they were in Kuwait, this was in 2004. It was obviously recently after 9/11 and during the war. He got to see people from all walks of life. And in that instance, or I guess comparison, was that he had seen vehicles drive past from with like banners of Osama bin Laden on it, and people driving around with guns and all sorts of stuff while living there, which isn't necessarily great for a young kid. But I guess real quick, while we're on this topic and his childhood, with his mom leaving at 9, he actually recently has come out and said that he has been back in contact with his mother. In the past, in some of his songs, let's just say he's talked about it, and has talked about it in anger, in the sense of that he felt abandoned and left. But within the past couple years after his father has passed away, he's actually been reconnected with his mother and has started to mend that relationship, and has forgiven her for what she did, because he sees it from a new perspective and has a new understanding for what she was going through as well. So that's actually pretty awesome for him. But when he was in Denver, and at a young age, because of bullying and all that kind of stuff, he got into rap pretty young, around the age of, I would say, 11 or 12, so 6th grade, and he was heavily influenced by DMX, Ludacris, and Eminem. And which is kind of ironic, considering later on he actually ended up having a feud with Eminem. The reason he actually ended up with the name Machine Gun Kelly was when he was rapping with other people, they noticed that his flow and cadence in which he rapped was very rapid fire and reminded them of the shooter from the 1900s. So that's where he got the name Machine Gun Kelly. Although he's mainly known for his music, he's also an actor. He's been in multiple movies, I think about 10 or 11. And his debut in acting was in the movie Beyond the Lights in 2014. He's acted in everything from horror movies like Bird Box to comedies like Big Time Adolescence with Pete Davidson, to also directing and acting in his own movie called Good Morning, spelled with a U, which just released a couple weeks ago, which I'm curious about and would like to actually watch. One of the first movies that I actually saw him in was Nerve, where he played a character, I don't know, his character didn't necessarily have a bunch of character, I guess. This character in the movie didn't necessarily do a whole lot, but I know he was in that and he played well. And I think he even played Tommy Lee in a movie. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. He played Tommy Lee in The Dirt in 2019 as well. But other than that, he's been in a lot of stuff. And when it comes to his music career, he actually released 4 mixtapes between 2007 and 2010, which was what actually got and built attention for him to get signed. And in 2011, he was actually approached by Big Sean to sign to Bad Boy Records. And it was in 2012 that he actually released his debut album called Lace Up. His second album ended up being General Admissions in 2015, and then his third album, Bloom, in 2017. And it was after the album Bloom that he actually released a diss track to Eminem, which started their online feud. And it all originated back, I think, in 2012 when Machine Gun Kelly said something about Eminem's daughter, and there was a little back and forth there for a little bit, and a few of Eminem's songs and Machine Gun Kelly's, but I think at this point this is history. His number one hip-hop album that he's actually released, it didn't hit number one, but it's his best-selling hip-hop album, was in 2019 named Hotel Diablo, which was actually his first album to reach over 1 billion listens. And I do love that album. It's really good. I encourage anybody to go listen to it. I love it. It's different, but it's great and has some amazing songs on it. But speaking of feuds besides Eminem, within the past couple years, he's actually had several feuds from Slipknot to even, which I don't even know if it was a feud, but Conor McGregor threw a drink on him at MTV Music Awards, I believe, for apparently no reason, at least not any that I'm aware of, but he's done quite a bit. Now that we've actually gotten through kind of, I guess, the introduction of who Machine Gun Kelly is and kind of his music career a little bit and movies, kind of figured out who he was a little bit. I said that several times, but you know what I mean. I guess let's kind of get into the bulk of where I'm getting this information, what kind of inspired me to want to do an episode on him, and just kind of go from there. So the whole reason I wanted to do this documentary, or what? I'm not making a documentary, to do this episode, was that I'm a big Machine Gun Kelly fan. I love his music. I haven't necessarily listened to him for a ridiculous amount of time, but I would say 3-ish years. But I take his music to heart pretty well. But the whole reason why I was kind of wanting to and saw an opportunity to was because of the Life in Pink documentary / movie that just released 3 days ago on Hulu, and it's basically about his whole transformation into, I guess, who he is now, which is, I guess, kind of like the Prince of Rock, and documents basically the past 2 years, with like why he transitioned to a punk rock album, just kind of his motivations, how he got into it, a little bit of his backstory, how he's been dealing with stuff that's been going on in the media, and kind of getting his perspective on everything that's happened to him. And the past couple years have been very, I guess, eventful, I guess is the right word, eventful for him. So one of the reasons why he actually got into the idea of possibly creating a rock album, or even getting kind of introduced into it in the sense of he's interested in that music, was actually thanks to COVID. It was in 2020 when he was out in LA and quarantined that he started to play guitar. I guess he used to, but he hadn't messed with it for a long time. So he started playing guitar a lot, and it kind of reignited his passion for guitar and rock in a way that after working with Travis Baker in the past to make a song with Youngblood, he kind of got that little bit of punk rock taste from Youngblood's song, and it kind of inspired him to want to possibly do something himself. And it put those two together, which Travis Baker, if somebody doesn't know, is the drummer from Blink-182, and he helped work with Machine Gun Kelly to make Tickets to My Downfall and Mainstream Sellout, and he was the main drummer for basically the whole track, like all the tracks for both albums, and he was the one that helped produce it and make it with him. So they started working together to create something. They just started making music together. They weren't necessarily shooting for making an album and everything like that, but it just kind of came in as they went along. At the start of the movie, it actually begins kind of with Machine Gun Kelly talking about his past a little bit, and how he dealt with neglect and everything as a child from his father emotionally. And earlier we talked that his mother left at a young age too, so that had a very large impact on his life in a negative fashion. And it was because of that he kind of sought approval from people through music. So when he released Hotel Diablo, although it was probably one of his best songs, he felt like he didn't get enough recognition from media and larger coverage over the album to actually push it, and he just didn't think that he got attention from it. So that had already kind of put a want to succeed, or at least do better, in his mindset of what ended up making him, or not making him, but inspired him to change stuff up a bit with his music. And you also find out that the whole reason his father was like that was actually something that happened to his dad at a young age, where when his father was young, he actually witnessed his dad die in front of him, and someone had broke into their house at the time and shot his dad with a shotgun, and he bled out at the scene in front of Colson's father. And they actually put Colson's father on trial when he was only 9 years old. And obviously something like that at such a young age would be so traumatizing. It would be something that you would deal with for the rest of your life. And he did. His dad was an alcoholic, although he was a missionary. That was kind of his coping mechanism, was both religion and alcohol. And it was kind of how he dealt with things. And it probably also has something to do with how much they moved, trying to get away from something and thinking that it would make things easier if they move somewhere else. As Colson and Travis Baker were working through what ended up becoming Tickets to My Downfall, they didn't realize they were actually trying to produce a record. They just happened to be making music, and every time they came with different songs and created new music more and more, and created some amazing songs that they ended up deciding, hey, have you heard from the label? And they hadn't. So they decided, fuck it, let's go in, show them the music, and see what they think. They went through and had them listen to the album. The label didn't know what to think at first. They were kind of surprised, considering this isn't his main genre that he's fallen into over the past 10 years. And they were kind of taken back, but they decided to go for it. And when they did, I think they were all kind of shocked that this album did as well as it did. It was his first album to be a number one and went platinum. And it was an amazingly large album. Nobody was expecting it. And it was after this album that he started to get a lot of hate. And that was probably what messed him up the most, was he wasn't understanding why everybody was necessarily coming at him for no reason. And and I understand. I don't totally understand. I don't get why at times when it comes to artists like that, the mainstream doesn't really look at the person, or even in his instant, they have never interviewed him or actually sat down and talked to him, and people would be writing articles about what a terrible person he is and why he did this and a bunch of stuff like that. And it got to him, and he got super depressed and didn't understand why he was getting so much hate. And at the same time, I've seen that. I know that a lot of people don't like Machine Gun Kelly, but in the documentary, they kind of get a contrast. They show that it's kind of, you got it either way. You either got it on both ends of the spectrum. You got people that absolutely hate Machine Gun Kelly because of who he is and his music, and they just don't like him for no real apparent reason, or you have people that absolutely love his music, and I guess I would fall into that category. It doesn't make sense to me personally, because I feel like at one point some people just don't enjoy the music because of the actual artistry. They try building up an image of the artist in their head on who they actually are, and in all reality, you don't know who they are. You can only take so much information from what you get from the mainstream news outlets, or what you see on social media, or what they put out, and as a musician in particular. And I feel like people jumped to opinions on his music and thought that he was a sellout. It had caused him to basically doubt himself, or not doubt himself, but it caused a lot of mental distress, because he was getting so much hate. And nowadays, the smallest person can basically be amplified by social media depending on their opinion and if other people agree. And sadly, most of the time, the vocal minority are the ones that get noticed and blow up when it comes to stuff like that. And it was in between these two albums. He toured and continued to work on the second album, but they actually decided to spend more time on it. But in these two albums, around that time, in the documentary, he talks about how he actually tried to commit suicide, and during it, he was on the phone with Megan Fox, and he ended up, after that moment, decided to basically quit drugs, because he realized it was putting a rift between him and his loved ones, between his girlfriend or wife, I don't know if they were married at the time, and his daughter. So as of right now, I believe he is drug free. I think the only thing he really does is smoke tobacco, as far as I'm aware. And it caused quite a issue. And he even says that in the documentary, that especially after the reception of Hotel Diablo, and it not necessarily getting the media attention that he would have thought it was going to, and he didn't understand why his stuff wasn't getting out to the world, he kind of went downhill, and he really got into drugs super heavily, and was probably at one of his lowest points when it came to addiction. But he has admitted to being addicted to Adderall. He smokes cannabis very often. Cannabis, weed, whatever. He smokes weed. I think he's talked about doing heroin and cocaine and Percocets and all sorts of stuff. And he decided that it was time for him to move on from that portion of his life, because he realized that it was having a negative effect between the people he loved, and he realized he couldn't be that way. During the release of the album, he got a bunch of press. Unlike when he was in Hotel Diablo, he ended up on every late show you could think of, having interviews with everybody, blew up, and a lot of people hated that because they thought that he basically changed genres just to get attention and to become a better artist, or not become a better artist, but to basically get attention. And he actually, during this time, when he started touring for Tickets to My Downfall in 2021, he got into a beef with Slipknot, which I kind of mentioned earlier. And the whole reason was because Slipknot had gone on a podcast, not this one, and had talked about how some artists just can't make it in one genre, so they decide to switch genres, and go into rock and all this, and he basically called out Machine Gun Kelly without stating his name, and he knew who it was and why. And some of the reason this whole beef started was because when Colson was making the album, he actually asked him to do a feature. Slipknot wrote a verse, and he had it prepared, listened to it. Colson didn't like it, and he ended up deciding, well, he didn't decide. He asked him to change it to fit the music better for what he was going for with the song. Slipknot declined, so Colson decided not to put it in. And that's kind of where the beef stemmed from. And from there, during a festival in Kentucky where they both were located, Colson, Machine Gun Kelly, got bottles and tree branches and all sorts of stuff tossed at him, and people were hating on him, and so he actually called Slipknot out during the festival. And sadly, it was at this point where they were going through all these festivals that he got so much hate. And one of the things that made Colson not understand where this was coming from was he was like, I've always had some sort of attachment to rock. And he talks about how he had a heavy metal band and his opening song for his first album, I believe. And not only that, but he's like, we've opened for rock artists. I've opened for Foo Fighters. I've opened for all these other rock bands. And now that's kind of what he's playing, or at least because of this album, he was getting a lot of backlash and hate and didn't totally understand why. It was also in the time of creating this album that him and Megan Fox started talking and ended up together and started dating. And I would say overall, their relationship, for what I could see, has definitely been a net positive, and she's definitely helped him move towards a better, because it provided an anchor for him to lean on when he had to deal with anxiety or depression. She was there to kind of help him. And now they're married and expecting a child as of, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago. So it's pretty crazy that a lot of this stuff has happened in 2 years. And even in the documentary, he talks about how, or I don't even know if he actually says it, but this documentary is practically a journal over the past 2.5, 3 years of his life, because of everything that's happened and all the attention he's gotten and how well his albums have done. His newest album, Mainstream Sellout, released March of 2022 and hit hit number 1 on Billboard charts. And in that time, this was the first time in his career that people around him had actually said he had focused on the numbers. And it's something he's never necessarily done, where because of that, and he was hyper focused on just being number 1 and trying to get this stuff, because he tried promising a second album if it got number 1, and he was so focused on work that even his daughter and his friends had basically said that after he kicked his addiction to drugs, that his next addiction basically became his work. It was the only thing he focused on hyperly, and because of that, he pushed everybody away. He talked about in the documentary that he came home and Megan was gone from their house and had left at the time, and he kind of pushed all his friends away. And the day he actually hit, or was told that he had the number 1 album, he actually felt, he said, the saddest and most alone that he's ever felt. But he's looked at it now differently, where in the documentary he talked about how his new goal is basically to actually focus on his family and his daughter more, and not be so caught up in the mainstream of just trying to be an amazing artist. And in that time, he's still done some pretty amazing things and has released new singles recently. And it's definitely shown, and he's been on some other stuff that he's changed his mindset on how he's going to treat stuff. I hope, since he did hit number one, and I am such a big fan, that he does release this album at the end of the summer. But he's made such a transition and has built up such a fan base, and the main reason why is because that he basically uses his insecurities, his past, his story, his life as inspiration to his music, and he lets people know what he's going through, and it allows everyone to relate. I know that his father had passed, I believe, in 2020, and at the time, I feel like now in his music, which I didn't realize as much, is compared to most, a decent portion of his music, or at least within the past two albums, are very, very in depth on stuff that he's dealing with, and stuff that's very personal. Like his song "Lonely" is very very personal in the sense of what he talks about with his aunt and his dad, and not being there for him when they died, and that because of him, he just feels alone, and he knows he made a mistake, and he talks about how when he did talk to his dad last, or not when he talked to his dad last, but he was on the phone when he took his dad took his last breath, and that he wasn't there and couldn't be there at the time, and that with his aunt, he basically kind of blew her off when he was caught up in the mainstream with the drugs and partying and touring, that he kind of blew her off when she was on the phone to him before she died, and he kind of he definitely regrets that, and you can tell, and so he's trying to learn and adjust. And I feel like in the past couple years, he's probably made the biggest changes in his life, between not being a drug addict anymore, with especially hard stuff and what he was doing, and changing what he's focusing on when it comes to his life, and changing his priorities. But at the same time, because of his music and because he talks so openly about the stuff he's dealing with, and what people are saying about him, it allows him to build a larger connection with his audience, and it just allows his music to have a larger outreach and build a stronger community than it ever had before. So I'm really curious to see how his next album goes. But as for that, I guess that's kind of the last bit in Life of Pink. In it, he also shows his past a little more with his come up, and how people don't necessarily understand that he started from the absolute bottom and living in a very rough neighborhood in Cleveland, and dealing with certain things, and performing on like not even a stage, just like a platform in a little park with a live crowd, and dealing with stuff, and a gun getting pulled on him when he had his daughter, and trying to deal with all that and still make it out, that he was able to channel all that into his music and still develop and create such a creative personality to make the music. And in the documentary itself, he doesn't personally show you, but you're there as he's creating some of these songs. And for me personally, some of these songs I've heard so many times because I just keep replaying it, and they're stuck in my head, and they're so good, that seeing how he takes that creative side and wanting to just like add this little bit here, or add this certain vocal and piece it together, you get to see the inside of the artist's mind a little bit. And he put together some of the, he won the number one alternative album of the year with both albums, and it shows because each album was developed in such a way that they definitely tell a story, and I feel like his career is just going to keep taking off from here. and I can't wait to necessarily see where it goes. I think everybody should, if you haven't, at least listen to some of his music, see what you think. And if you're curious about him, I definitely recommend watching this documentary on Hulu. It's like an hour and 40 minutes long, but it's something that's very, I guess, eye-opening into the world of a major celebrity and one of the largest artists of the time, I feel like, or one of the most polarizing artists, where most you don't get that opportunity to kind of see inside their life and what they're going through and what they're dealing with and their emotions and where everything's coming from and how they're dealing with the public facade and the publicity, bad or good, and everything they see. So it was really cool to see someone's mindset as they work through dealing with such major fame, especially like with XXX, which was the last documentary I watched. It's a little different. I mean, obviously he's passed away. These are old videos. It's not necessarily happening as much in the moment. They don't have him to obviously talk to in this interview, and he's there kind of looking back at everything during this documentary, explaining what he was doing and kind of his mindset and saying certain stuff. But it's very eye-opening, and I know that compared to other artists, his songs definitely have such a story that getting to see the behind the scenes of where these stories were coming from and then seeing the lyrics in the music and knowing the meaning behind it was really cool. So if anyone's curious to kind of see the inside of a number one artist, I would definitely encourage someone to watch this documentary. But I think that's going to call it for this week. I do hope you guys enjoyed. It's a little different. I'm changing it up next week. I think I'm going to be talking about habit. So if you guys have any questions, leave them down below. DM me on Instagram, comment on the YouTube videos, anything like that. It's much appreciated. And we'll just keep going from there. We'll see what we can do, and I hope you guys have enjoyed. And it's a little different, but I'm just talking about stuff that I'm into and I'm interested in, and I hope you guys are enjoying and are along for the ride at the moment. And I would love to get some guest on eventually. So we'll see how that goes. But I'll talk to you guys all in the next one. See you guys. Peace out.